Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is John Literal, host of JohnLiteral.com, and this is the final section of the audio version that I'm doing for my book called Handbook on the Powers That Should Not Be. And these last two sections are about the historical Christ and also my personal evidence about Jesus. So let's go ahead and start off with the historical Christ. Now, for the conclusion of this book, I want to add some thoughts about the historical Christ. It has become increasingly argued by skeptics that the entire Bible is a myth, including the accounts of the existence of Jesus. There is a large spectrum of beliefs about what is considered historical and what is considered myth when it comes to the contents of the Bible. Some believe that the contents of the Bible should only be understood as parables and strictly didactic and not historical. There are some scholars out there that argue a theory that they label as the Jesus myth. I have listened to one of those scholars for years, Dr. Robert Price. I highly respect Dr. Price because he is intellectually honest and is well researched. Dr. Price actually admires the teachings attributed to Jesus and even calls himself a quote-unquote Christian atheist, which is an oxymoron, but according to Price, he actually does try to live by the moral teachings that have been attributed to Christ, but he does not believe Jesus literally is a historical person. I found his debate with Bart Ehrman to be quite interesting, both being atheists, but Bart defended the historical Jesus. Dr. Price often points out in many of his talks and interviews about how Christianity and its doctrines draws from earlier ancient religions and myths. Price believes that Christianity is a historical blend of mainly Egyptian, Jewish, and Greek mythologies, and that the early Christians adopted the model of the figure of Jesus from the popular Mediterranean dying rising savior myths of the time, such as that of Dionysus. There is absolutely no doubt that there is tremendous amount of similarity between the stories of the Bible and those earlier myths and religions. Even the flood account in the book of Genesis is very similar to other stories given in other myths and religions. But does this mean that the Bible and the stories of Jesus are simply myths that are used by the biblical authors and then reworked? Absolutely not. My perspective about this is perhaps outside of the common paradigm that many Christians argue from. I believe that it is quite possible that these earlier stories that contain concepts are found in the Bible and run very parallel are concepts that were planted into the minds of mankind by God and were early manifestations of the fuller truth that would be revealed later. Often Christian apologists will take a rigid and more defensive position and declare that early pagans could not have had anything revealed to them by God, and any revelations would come from the demonic side. But even the Bible itself gives some examples of divine revelations being revealed to pagans, such as the sorcerer Balaam, who prophesied about the coming Messiah, and the Magi, who recognized that prophecy by the signs in the sky. John Henry Newman tackled this argument very well concerning if Christianity took concepts from earlier traditions. He says, quote, and this is kind of a lengthy quote, "The phenomenon admitted on all hands is this, that the great portion of what is generally received as Christian truth is, in its rudiments, or in its separate parts, to be found in heathen philosophies and religions. For instance, the doctrine of a Trinity is found both in East and in the West. So is the ceremony of washing. So is the rite of sacrifice. The doctrine of the divine word is Platonic. The doctrine of the incarnation is Indian. Of a divine kingdom is Judaic. Of angels and demons is Magian. The connection of sin with the body is Gnostic. Celibacy is known to Bonds and Talapoin. A sacerdotal order is Egyptian. The idea of a new birth is Chinese and Eleusinian. Belief in sacerdotal virtue is Pythagorean. and honors to the dead are polytheism. Such is the general nature of the fact before us. Mr. Milman, who John Henry Newman was debating, Mr. Milman argues from it, saying, quote, "These things are in heathenism, therefore they are not Christian. We, on the contrary, prefer to say these things are in Christianity, therefore they are not heathen. That is, we prefer to say, and we think that Scripture bears us out in saying, that from the beginning the moral governor of the world has scattered the seeds of truth far and wide over its extent, that these have variously taken root and grown as in the wilderness, wild plants indeed, but living, and therefore that as the inferior animals have tokens of an immaterial principle in them, yet have not souls, so the philosophies and religions of men have their life in certain true ideas, though they are not directly divine. What man is amid the brute creation, such is the church among the schools of the world. And as Adam gave names to the animals about him, so has the church from the first looked round upon the earth, noting and visiting the doctrines she found there. She began in Chaldea, and then sojourned among the Canaanites, and went down into Egypt, and then passed into Arabia, till she rested in her own land. Next she encountered the merchants of Tyre, and the wisdom of the east country, and the luxury of Sheba. Then she was carried away to Babylon, and wandered to the schools of Greece. And wherever she went, in trouble or in triumph, she still was a living spirit, the mind and voice of the Most High, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions, claiming to herself what they said rightly, correcting their errors, supplying their defects, completing their beginnings, expanding their surmises, and thus gradually by means of them enlarging the range and refining the sense of her own teaching. So far, then, from her creed being of doubtful credit because it resembles foreign theologies, we even hold that one special way in which Providence has imparted divine knowledge to us has been by enabling her to draw and collect it together out of the world, and, in this sense, as in others, to suck the milk of the Gentiles and to suck the breast of kings. End of quote by John Henry Newman. Then Fritz Springmeier also gives an excellent article or an argument in an unpublished article that he allowed me to use for this book. Fritz says, quote, "The arguments that Christ never existed boils down to two parts. One, doubters feel the evidence for his existence is weak. And two, doubters think the gospel stories are myths. Now, how or why do they feel the evidence is weak? Well, they throw out anything written by Christians as biased. And then they throw out half a dozen Roman records of Jesus by making excuses, lame in my opinion. Next, they claim the Jewish historian Josephus did not write about Christ in his Jewish Antiquities history book that came out around 93 AD. Supposedly, the Christians tampered with the manuscript of this book. Then, having made outrageous excuses for why we should not believe the historical evidence that is there, they say, if he was real, there would be more evidence. I have not heard how they discount the Jewish Mishnah, written by Jesus' enemies, that says, quote, on the eve of Passover, they hanged Jesus of Nazareth, end quote. While the Jewish religious leaders were definitely hostile to Jesus, they never denied his existence. And there are too many clues that could not have been faked by Christians. How about the Christian acrostic found in recent years buried in Pompeii by the volcano covered Pompeii in 79 AD. And how about all the ruins of churches scattered everywhere? And what about the Roman soldiers' graffiti mocking Christians found by archaeologists? Are you going to tell me all the writers of the New Testament conspired to create a hoax, and that tens of thousands of people across the Roman Empire were involved also? The truth is this: the teachings and the Christian traditions had to come from somewhere. The fragments of the New Testament show that parts had been written not that long after Jesus was crucified, certainly not centuries later like skeptics want to believe. Now, critics claim the Bible books were invented by various people. In one theory, supposedly an elite Roman invented them. Yeah, right. I would like to see anyone in the elite invent something like the New Testament, and the teachings of Christ did not support the Roman elite, which is why every few years the Romans tried to exterminate the Christians. What convoluted thinking? No matter what evidence surfaces or is mentioned, you will continue seeing skeptics say there is no contemporary evidence outside of the New Testament that Jesus ever existed. And that is patently false. Practically everything that could be has been nitpicked and questioned. For instance, supposedly Matthew did not write Matthew. Well, Matthew was an educated tax collector who knew math and writing, and it is thought that he was the unofficial historian for the 12 disciples. So there is no problem with him writing the book of Matthew. Why isn't there more contemporary writings documenting Jesus? 99%, if not more, of the writings from the first century are forever lost. 2 of the 4 Roman historians of that period mention him. For instance, Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus describes Christ's suffering under perfect Pontius Pilate. He began writing his annals in 95 AD, about the time John was writing the Apocalypse. Speaking about Pilate, supposedly he was too brutal to have ever said Christ was innocent. But if we look at all the details about Pilate's personality, he may have been brutal, but he was also an astute politician. He did not want to execute a popular preacher/healer on the eve of the Passover. So the New Testament account is very consistent with his personality. He had been a governor in Celtic Britannia before the transferring of Judea, and a very prominent question to the Celtic bards taught him was, quote, "What is truth?" There are only thousands of other ridiculous nitpicky issues raised by people. On the surface, it sounds legit. The mythicists take a little of this and some of the pagan myth. The problem is they borrow from all over, and a close look at the pagan myths show they don't resemble the account of Jesus at all. You can't take myths from different places and sources and clobber them together to explain Jesus. Pagans did believe in dying and rising gods, but Jesus' resurrection was grounded in the messianic beliefs of the Jewish people that God, through an eschatological event, that is, the resurrection, would gain control over the earth. Jesus was a public figure appearing to many thousands of people. Within 30 years of his crucifixion, the various Gospels were already in circulation about this very public figure. There are all the writings by the multitudes of the people who lived in the lands he traveled in, who would have written about how no one remembers anything like that. An obvious hoax about a public figure would have been easy to spot, but we find no one protesting how the Christians have created a mythological person. Now that's the end of quote by Fritz Springmeier. Now the next section is the last section of the book, and this is just my personal evidence. Intellectually, I find that there is sufficient evidence in the historical Jesus, as shown above. The story that I'm about to tell is not evidence of Jesus directly, but it was evidence that was shown to me that there's definitely something beyond the reality that we see which truly exists. Many years ago, when I was a Southern Baptist, I was teaching and doing a lesson on various biblical topics. I had been doing some research on Satan and demons, and I was preparing a lesson on that topic. One afternoon, I was home alone, and I decided to lay down and take a nap. During that nap, I was woken up, and I could see everything around me, but I could not move my body. It was like I was completely paralyzed. I felt a pressure around my skull closing in as it was squeezing tighter and tighter by the second. I heard a voice whispering in my ear saying over and over, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." This was extremely terrifying. The pressure kept getting tighter around my skull, and it felt like my head was going to pop like a grape any moment, while the voice kept whispering in my ear, telling me that it was going to kill me. I was desperate and started praying, "Lord, help me. In the name of Jesus, please help me." And suddenly, the pressure around my head was released and the voice was gone, and I was able to move my body. But for what seemed like 5 to 10 seconds, I felt just the strongest presence of evil in the room, and it faded off in a bizarre manner. The only way that I can describe that fading away was the sensation I felt one time after a major storm where a tornado had touched down close by. During that storm, there was quite a chaotic period of strong winds and trees falling down everywhere and rain pouring down like I had never seen before. But all of a sudden, the storm stopped and calmness came. But for a brief moment, that storm vanished back up into the sky, and it was as if you could feel it disappear in a few seconds' time. And when it did, the sun came out, and it went from chaos to sunny and calm very quickly. That may seem like a strange way to compare a demonic attack, but those two times are the only times I had ever felt such a strange sensation, though the demonic attack was by far more frightening and intense. I had many years to think about the experience and wonder why I had it. I have always felt like God allowed that to happen to me in order to teach me a lesson. Being the kind of person who questions everything, and I have had periods of doubt and confusion, some of what I had written about in this book. But one thing that the experience taught me was that no matter how much doubt and confusion that I struggle with spiritually, I can never doubt that there is a reality beyond the world and reality that we see with our eyes. It also taught me that there is a dark and evil spiritual force that does exist. I am thankful to have had the experience, but I hope to not have any more demonic interactions like that. It also taught me that prayer works, because I do believe it was the power of prayer and a cry of desperation that warded off the demonic attack. Another bizarre thing that happened to me one time was I had a premonition, which was a vivid dream about the death of a coworker. This happened in 1999. At the time, I was working at a foundry, and for a period of time, I worked with a man by the name of Carl Simpson. I got to be friends with him and really enjoyed working with him. He was funny and loved pulling off pranks. He would do things like put grease in the fingers of your gloves, and when you would put the gloves on, your fingers would squash in the grease. He would also do things like put a little grease on those cones that we would drink water from. And he would stick them on people's hard hats, and then they would walk around with a cone on their heads and not even know it. He did that to me many times. Carl loved having a good time. Eventually, Carl transferred to another department, and I had not seen him for quite a while. Every now and then I would pass him by on lunch break, but I rarely would see him. One day I had a vivid dream that I was at work and I saw Carl lying on a stretcher dead, and there were people standing around him. I remember asking what happened to him, and someone replied that he got caught in something. The dream was so real, and it left such an impression on me that I felt troubled when I woke up. It was way beyond what a normal intense dream feels like. After that, I remember passing Carl one day and stopped to speak to him for a moment, and I remember that it was almost a little bit creepy because the dream left such an impression on me that it was almost like seeing someone who had died. Then, after a few months after that dream, I was working evening shift, and when I arrived at work and pulled into the lot, I had a feeling of dread come upon me. I had the strongest feeling that something bad had happened. And as I was walking into work and was approaching my department that I was working in at the time, the feeling of dread kept getting stronger and stronger the closer I got to the time clock. Oddly enough, the dream about Carl did not cross my mind as being the source of that dread. Finally, once I had walked into the lab department that I was working in at the time, my co-workers in that department were standing around waiting for shift change. I asked them how they were doing, and co-worker Roy Long, who was one of the day turn workers, looked at me and said, "I've got some bad news. That boy Carl Simpson got killed earlier today." Come to find out, Carl was killed by a mold machine that he got caught in, which was exactly how he was killed in my dream. I was stunned by the whole experience. That night when I got off work, I ran me a hot tub of bath water and just laid in there to relax and wind down. As I was lying there thinking about the dream and what had happened to Carl, the funniest thing happened to me, just that could have been a coincidence, but maybe not. I was laying there, and all of a sudden, my son's rubber ducky that we had hanging up in the little net above the tub fell out and hit me right between the legs. I just laughed because it seemed like something Carl would have done, being the prankster that he was. That whole experience is another thing that I feel God used to teach me a lesson. It was far beyond coincidence. I feel that God let me experience that in order to confirm that there is more to this reality than we see with our eyes. There is a spiritual side that I personally cannot deny. Experiences like that have always been a witness to spiritual things, even when I have had the darkest nights of my soul when I did not know what to believe. And that is the end of this book. And I will leave a link in the description box below. I'll leave actually a couple links. One is a link to the free PDFs of the last 3 books that I've written. And then another link will be to this book, which you can read freely online on my website on johnliteral.com. So, folks, I appreciate you all. Take care. Have a good day.